Welcome to GS Podcast number 138. I'm Stephen Knight and I hope you're all well. Going to be bringing you a fantastic discussion with Sadia Hameed. Now, Sadia is a ex-Muslim activist. She's the spokesperson for the Ex-Muslim Forum, Council of Ex-Muslims Great Britain. She's doing some incredible work, some important work, and I've recorded hundreds and hundreds of interviews now, and every now and then you get one that's quite personal and unique, where you're sat there listening, you can't quite believe what you're hearing. She's been through a lot, and to come out the other side of it as smart and well-adjusted and as committed and passionate as she is towards human rights is quite inspiring, really. So I think you'll get a lot from this episode. So you can find Sadia on Twitter to send her some love, some feedback. She's at Sadia936. You can also find the Council of Ex-Muslims Great Britain on Twitter. That's at CEMB_forum. Send them some love, send them some feedback, and take a look at the campaign they're currently running at the moment about LGBT awareness. They're trying to raise funds in order to have a significant presence at Pride this year. Really kind of represent the ex-Muslim voice there. Some of you may remember they were there 2 years ago and caused quite a bit of controversy with certain signs, things like Allah is gay. And what was great about that is it annoyed precisely the right kind of people. The Council of Muslims in Britain were not impressed, filed complaints. East London Mosque were not impressed and objected, and there were significant efforts made to try and get ex-Muslim groups banned from future Pride events, and I'm pleased to see that that's not stuck, and they should be there this year as well. So please consider supporting that campaign, and you can read all about it and find the link in the show notes. Okay, you can keep up to date on the podcast at gspellchecker.com. If you'd like to support the podcast, this is a one-man operation done in my spare time away from my day job, so it's entirely listener-supported. I work for you, basically. So if you'd like to support the show, you can do so by visiting gspellchecker.com/support. And you can give as much as you want per episode, or you can give $1 or £1 a month as frequently as you like, and you can cancel at any time. Just don't. Enjoy.
There's a word that some folks find real hard to spell. Ain't it horrible to accept after saying, who cared to go burn in hell? But then along came a man, a spiritual corrupt God of creed, and he set out upon a noble quest to help those that don't know what it means. And he said, go ACHGIST, and don't you put that I before that E. ACHGIST, don't mean we don't speak to them. And he keeps telling them things that God is saying. Reason shoppers at night will make them run away. But if it's not that fight, well, they can go all day. Spell checker, easy, got to spell check. Now you know how it goes, to sing along with me. ACHGIST, ACHGIST, ACHGIST.
I'm very pleased to welcome Sadia Hameed to the GS podcast. Sadia, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. I'm very happy about the work you're doing with the Ex-Muslim Council of Britain. Maybe you could just tell me a little bit about your role there.
So my role is spokesperson for the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. And the role's really kind of quite huge in some ways, because it's not just public speaking. So the organisation has two wings. One's a campaigning wing and the other is a support service. And the support service has just grown and grown in the last few years. So when I first started in 2016 officially, and I was volunteering for a year before that, we were supporting 300 clients a month. Now my caseload alone is 600 clients a month, and that could range from just like a quick email with basic information and advice to like advocating for people in court and doing witness testimonies, and everything in between. You know, we've helped people get forced marriage protection orders. We've helped people with the support of the forced marriage unit get them repatriated from abroad, because some of the main issues that British ex-Muslims face are things like honour crimes, forced marriage, and daily honour-based oppression and abuse. And then the campaigning wing, I guess it speaks for itself. You know, we do lots of campaigning and activism and public actions. So my role entails all of those things and everything in between that you can think of, really.
Wow, yeah, there's a lot of big issues in there that I'm sure we'll delve into. But maybe you could just tell my listeners a little bit about your background. You openly identify as an ex-Muslim now, obviously, but that hasn't always been the case. And maybe you could just explain a little bit how you arrived at that position of being an ex-Muslim. What sort of upbringing did you have?
Sure. So I actually... I remember asking questions from a really, really young age. And now this has become like a cliche line. It's so cringy to relay the same sort of stuff again and again. But yeah, I used to ask questions when I was a kid. I used to ask like basic things, actually. So I'd ask things like, I'd ask my mum, you know, mummy and daddy, you guys got married and then you had us. We were your babies. And then when I get married, I'm going to have babies, because I thought that's how it worked. And I said to her, well, where are God's mummy and daddy? And where are God's children? Where are his family? You know, just basic childish like questions. And I remember my mum saying things like, well, you've got the devil inside you, you're possessed, there's something wrong with you, you're obviously not praying hard enough. And actually, as a child, as a religious child that's been brought up in a religious household, that is the scariest thing a parent can say to their child. And it is abusive. It's absolutely abusive, because you think that there's something very, very wrong with you. Why am I not just understanding? Other people are just understanding without question. And I can't get my thick head to kind of, understand the information that's being given to me. So that was one thing. Then a little bit later on in life, that was probably when I was, I'd say 6, 7. Then a little bit later on in life, I used to talk about wanting to travel the world. I loved the idea of doing that. And my mum used to say things to me like, so you can get married, have children. When your children have had children, then you and your husband can go and get married, can go traveling. And I was like, well, why do I have to wait so long? And she was like, well, firstly, you have to do this. But secondly, you can't travel as a lone woman, because what if somebody tries to rape you? And I would try and like reason with her. I'd ask her, well, if there was somebody that wanted to rape me, all he'd have to do is shoot my husband, rape me and shoot me. Job done. So what good would a husband be in that scenario, you know? And then she'd start telling me that I couldn't travel without a mehram, so a male guardian, and that this was all Islamically mandated. So there was always that kind of curious, critical mind as a youngster that I had. But actually, when I left when I was 15, it was so simple. I was bored.
Right, okay. So
Can you imagine reading the same book every day, you know, doing the same 5 prayers every single day? And now I feel aggrieved about it, actually, because I've got a library in my house and I feel really gutted because I buy more books than I can read. I can't read the books quickly enough. And I could have been reading those books when I was younger rather than reading the same book over and over again, reading the same prayers over and over again. So I do feel a bit aggrieved by it. But when I first left Islam as a 15-year-old, it was simply, 1, I was bored. 2, I wanted to do what my white friends were doing, my non-Muslim friends were doing. 3, I kind of wanted to shag around, which I did.
as good a reason as any.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, lots of times, ex-Muslim or Muslim atheists, they get accused of wanting to leave Islam because they have a boyfriend or because they're already, because they're wanting to do that stuff. I don't see the problem in it. I
Yeah,
don't.
I've seen that argument. You're only leaving Islam because you want to sin. Well, yes.
And what's the problem with that? You know?
Exactly. So, I mean, some of my listeners hearing about the treatment you had at home under this kind of really conservative interpretation of Islam might be wondering how common that interpretation is in sort of British Muslim culture. I mean, a lot of people might be forgiven for thinking that's quite extreme. And how would you say that fits on the scale of most people's understanding of Islam within the British household?
It's quite common. So at that point, actually, my parents were still quite liberal in some ways, even though it sounds extreme. They were quite liberal at that point because their extreme view of Islam has gotten worse over the years. So that was when I was 15. Then I ran away from home. My parents found out about it. That I had. Obviously, they found out that I ran away from home, but they also found out that I was shagging and seeing a white man. So they then sent me to Pakistan and kept me prisoner out there and starved me. I was beaten out there. I was locked up out there.
Wow.
And I was essentially tortured whilst I was in Pakistan.
I'm sorry, how old was you when you were sent to Pakistan?
I was 15. So my parents actually took me out there. They didn't want to stay with me. They bought my passport back. And a year later, they had to bring me back because I was on the verge of dying. Like I'd become so malnourished, but I couldn't really hold myself up properly.
So who did they leave you with in Pakistan?
They left me at my mum's parents' house, but my mum's parents were actually in Saudi. They had left me with her sister. She also had a younger sister that was a couple of months younger than me. And the older sister had, who was younger than my mum, but older than this other sister. She had a husband out there that used to come and visit regularly. And my aunt would cook for him, like these massive pots of food. And she would just pick them up and take them in their bedroom. And we'd be knocking on the door saying, like, you know, I'm hungry. And they weren't interested.
So what was the main spoken language? Was it Urdu?
So there's this obnoxiousness out there and this arrogance out there. They think the Urdu is spoken by the higher classes. So I was brought up Punjabi, but my mum always wanted us to speak Urdu. And when I was dumped out there, they'd all said to me, if you don't speak Urdu, we're not going to speak to you. Well, I was stubborn. I didn't want to be there anyway. So I just carried on in Punjabi. So after 2 weeks, they were forced to engage with me in Punjabi.
So you're there at 15 against your will, and you're still within the British schooling system at that point. Were there no flags raised as to your whereabouts at any point?
So because I had run away from home, social care had been involved, but 2 months after social care becoming involved, I turned 16. So social care just closed the file and chucked it away. And actually, it wasn't all that uncommon for people to cross you off the register.
Right.
If you hadn't been to school for a couple of weeks. So I actually left school with no GCSEs because I was taken to Pakistan in April. Actually, it was slightly more complicated than that. So because social care were involved, my dad was trying to prevent social care finding out what they were doing with me. They took me to the US first, dumped me with my uncle for a couple of months whilst I turned 16 out there. And it wasn't, it sounds like, I went on some holiday or something. I was kept like a prisoner out there as well. There was lots of physical violence and emotional and verbal abuse going on out there. Then after my 16th birthday, they brought me back to the UK for 1 day on like a transition flight. And then they took me to Pakistan and then dumped me out in Pakistan.
Oh, God. How did you end up back in Britain then?
So my parents, my dad came to see me. And because I used to steal milk, which is unpasteurized and unhomogenized out there, I used to steal milk when the milkman used to come. That made me violently sick on quite a few occasions. I had food poisoning like constantly whilst I was out there. I'd lost so much weight, A, from the food poisoning and B, from the malnutrition. And fortunately, although it sounds like a horrific story, I always say to people that I'm very, very lucky because if they had killed me out there, this was, 18 years ago now. So where are we, 2019? So 2001, this was going on. 18 years ago, a little brown girl, nobody would have cared about her. And, if parents manage to get kids out of the country without anybody finding out, it still sometimes happens. Had they told me out there back then, nobody would have found out, because think about it, all of my friends were 15-year-olds. One of my friends dared to go to my grandparents' house because everybody knew where my grandparents lived. Nobody knew where my parents had lived, because my last year of school, they had taken me out of central Oxford to like a town outside of central Oxford. So all my friends knew where my grandparents lived, because we used to live next door to my grandparents when we were in Oxford. And they went and knocked on my grandparents' door, and they just slammed the door in their face. When they went to the police just laughed them off. And we still have this problem in this country. Think about Rotherham, Rochdale, Oxford, all the grooming gangs in this country. We still have this one major failure in this country of talking about young people and, but not talking to young people or listening to young people. That hasn't changed since then all the way till now.
So you were brought home then, presumably for health reasons. Then that's what got you back into the UK.
Yeah.
Right. So how was the relation? I mean, did you go straight back to home? Did you say I think maybe before we started recording, did you then go off to university? Was that when you kind of made another leap from home?
Yeah, so it's a bit complicated actually. So whilst I was in Pakistan, because I had dated a white guy and, I'd run away from home, they were desperately trying to marry me off. But my parents made one key fundamental mistake at that point. They told the family about this white guy and the fact that I'd run away from home. So as a 15-year-old, when they were trying to marry me off, had nobody else known, they would have been successful. But because everybody else found out, they were saying things like, well, she's a used tissue, she's, disgusting. And at that time, I actually thought it was really hurtful. They were saying things like that about me. But now when I look back, I think, thank gosh.
Yeah. Sort of a saving grace. Well,
yeah.
That's interesting to me. I mean, this issue of you hooking up with a white guy. Now, was the main contention that this is just a non-Muslim white guy, or is it because he's white, or is it a bit of both? I mean, how may they have felt about, say, a white Muslim convert, for instance?
So it's interesting, this actually. I had a friend at school, and her story was all over the press. Mana Begum, she was Bangladeshi Muslim. She dated a Pakistani Muslim guy. Her parents found out. They went and stabbed him to death. So this isn't just about, whether he's Muslim or not Muslim. This is about control. Had he been and there is a racist element here as well. My community is very, very, very racist. I remember that when I was at uni, I had a friend whose name was Asif, who was a Christian Pakistani from Pakistan, and they became interested in him because it would have been easier for me to marry a Christian Pakistani guy than a Muslim white guy, to explain that to the family. So there is that element too. Mum and Dad brought me back. Dad couldn't share a flight with me. He didn't want to be in the same space as me. He was so disgusted by me. So he booked me a flight a few days after him. He came back, then I came back. When I arrived, they picked me up at the airport. But they didn't want the rest of the family to know that they'd brought me back. So I had to hide around the house if anybody ever came round. They had to pretend I was still out in Pakistan.
Wow, this is awful. I mean, I'm familiar with the work that you do now, but I'll be honest with you, I wasn't particularly well versed in your background and your upbringing. So this is pretty horrendous stuff, really, isn't it, for a 15-year-old to have to go through?
Yeah. But it's just my culture, innit? So that's what I've been told. And the problem that I have, Stephen, is that things have started going backwards. I got into the line of work that I previously did before CEMB. So my professional background is a women's sector before this. And I specialised in harmful traditional practices, so the experiences of minority community women. So that's things like honour crimes, forced marriage, FGM, dowry-related abuse. You know, there's like there's 14 different harmful traditional practices: polygamy, acid attacks, female infanticide. You know, there's quite an extensive list. So I got into that because, one, because of what happened to me, but two, because of the Banaz Mahmood case, where her parents had killed her for choosing who she fell in love with. Now, when I first got into the sector, we only used to have conversations about race and culture. Now we've started having conversations about religion too. I had, in my county, I live in Gloucestershire, in my county, I was the only professional delivering training around harmful traditional practices. And I'd been doing that for almost half a decade now. And it was hard, but not this hard. Now, because of the whole discussion around anti-Muslim bigotry or Islamophobia, and because of my professional background now, what I do right now, I've been accused of being an anti-Muslim bigot, because it's easier than calling me an Islamophobe, because now people have sussed, those complainants have sussed that if they do say that it's going to be harder for them to justify it.
The game's rigged, isn't it? Because I'm very vocally critical of Islam, and so I get called, you know, racist, white supremacist, and I thought, well, I'd almost take that to heart were it not for the treatment I saw that non-white ex-Muslims were getting. So it's a lot worse than the treatment I'm getting, and they're making this, you know, similar arguments. So the game is rigged at a certain level, isn't it, in terms of discussion about the extremist elements of Islam?
But what's happened now, Stephen, this training that was desperate, so crucial, I was the only person doing it in my county, has now been stopped because there were two complaints last year. So one was a guy who was in my training that was saying, well, not all forced marriages are forced marriages, some forced marriages are arranged marriages. And I just explained the difference between a forced and arranged marriage, and obviously there's a big grey area in between that I talk about as well. And this Islamist within my training was like, well, not all forced marriages are you know, non-consensual. And I was like, right, there's a problem with you, mate. Then the other training, there was a woman who was wearing a hijab where her shoulders were uncovered, and we had this discussion. I said, you know, it must be really hard for you, because I know if you don't wear the traditional hijab, there's still backlash against you. So like I was just having like an honest discussion with her. It wasn't targeted or anything like that. She then claimed that she was targeted and singled out in the training, which I would never do, you know. And after 5 years of having a track record of delivering outstanding training and having fantastic feedback, two Islamists derailed my training and derailed all the hard work that I'd done in my county. So that's the situation I'm in now. So all of these things that I've struggled against are being undone, and all the hard work that you know, the women's sector specifically dealing with harmful traditional practices has done is being undone by like this, you know, crazy Islamophobia sort of lobby, as it were. And the problem I have, Stephen, is I'm so pissed off. Sorry, I forgot to ask. Can I actually swear?
Yes, you fucking can. It's fine.
I'm getting so pissed off with having to safeguard my perpetrators or every single perpetrator in my community. When we talk about domestic abuse and sexual violence, nobody for one moment thinks that instantly I'm talking about every single man being a rapist or an abuser. Nobody thinks that, right? If I talk about racism, nobody thinks that I'm saying for a moment that every single white person is a racist, because that would be racist in itself. Nobody thinks when we're talking about far-right fundamentalism that we mean every single white person. Why am I having to add this caveat when we're talking about Muslim fundamentalists or Muslim paedophiles?
That's really interesting. How many times have you heard, you know, you'll mention a particular specific issue, and you'll point to the people who are culpable for it within a community, and somebody will pipe up straight away with, most Muslims are peaceful, there's 1.6 billion Muslims, etc., etc. This isn't a representative of Islam. And like you say, we don't have to add that caveat to any other sort of facet of wrongdoing, do we?
Exactly. And do you know what? Sometimes we are given 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes on a panel. If I have to spend the first, 2 to 5 or sometimes 10 minutes adding these bastard caveats, it's a lot of my time.
We need to get you a t-shirt that just says "Not all Muslims," so it's there front and center.
It's like straight up dealt with before I even start.
See the shirt. Yeah, so exactly. That's really interesting. So we've got all these really horrendous pressing issues that are specific to women, and they are also specific to Islam. But as soon as we start acknowledging the second part of what I've just said, we kind of run into problems there. So why is the mainstream left, I think, is probably the issue. Why are they so reluctant to point the finger at cultural and traditional issues that are having a massive detrimental effect to women when it's Islamic?
I think for me, this just feels like racism. I'm not going to call it anything else. There's lots of different, terms and words that are now used, cultural relativism or, identity politics and shit like that. It's just plain racism. If you think that other people can't defend themselves, can't stand up to, that need protecting against criticism, but you're quite happy to deal with criticism against your community, well, then you're just saying that those lot are savages and can't stand up for themselves. But so I must defend them. I've been talking about it quite a lot recently. So I've been likening it to the modern white man's burden. The white man has to protect this Muslim community that's incapable of looking after themselves, the savages that can't sort of defend themselves. It's very patronizing. I was born and raised in this country. I can handle and the people that I'm talking to and about these issues were born and raised in this country as well. They are perfectly capable of having this adult conversation with me around some of the harmful ideas within their community. Nowadays, they don't even have to, though. Nowadays, they just push these liberal lefties in front and allow them to speak on their behalf.
So, I suppose that maybe kind of overlaps on the issue of feminism we have, because you self-identify as a woman's rights activist, and that's a perfectly sensible and necessary endeavour. But I just feel that what's considered sort of mainstream feminism or third wave feminism, as it's sometimes known, kind of goes missing on topics related to women's rights within Islam. And I was just wondering, is there a feeling of betrayal about that, where fellow feminists sometimes turn a blind eye to issues within Islam?
Hugely. So, like the rest of my journey, so I was brought back from Pakistan. Then my parents couldn't do anything with me, right? So I was stuck at home, pissing them off essentially, because I didn't really want to be seeing my face. So they let me go to college because nobody was going to marry me. They couldn't keep me at home the whole time. I wasn't going to be able to get a job because I had no GCSEs, no work experience or anything. So they let me go back to college, where I spent so I started college at 17 because they had brought me back when I was 16, had my 17th birthday, and then the new academic year started. So I spent the next 4 years shagging around and taking as many narcotics as I possibly could.
That's what university's for.
Yeah, well, this is college, because
right.
I was so behind. I had to redo my college. I've only got 2 GCSEs. Then I did AS levels, and that didn't really work out. Then they made me do accounting because they got me engaged after a while. So this was a strange time. So we went to Pakistan after my mum had been talking to a guy for a year. She'd been trying to get me to talk to him, and I refused to talk to him. So what they did, the next best thing that they could do, where I wouldn't talk to him on the phone, they booked me a flight to Pakistan. They took me out there, and my mum, where I hadn't, this is really gross, this is a bit personal, I never used to shave my legs. Not because I didn't want to. I didn't know how. Nobody taught me stuff like that. So my mum, before I went to Pakistan to see this guy, had my legs waxed. Oh yeah, everything used to happen under the covers. Of course, I forgot to add that. So because I was really embarrassed about being really hairy, I used to shag everyone under the covers. Like, it was really embarrassing. You're getting quite a lot of personal content today, Steve.
This is great. This is golden.
So yeah, my mum had my arms, my legs, and all of my face waxed. So I got to Pakistan and I came out in like zits all over my face. It was really disgusting. And this guy who had told my parents that he was the exact same age as me, and I was 18, I was on the crux of turning 18, 19 then. So could have been 19, could have been 18. I never quite remember. So he sees me and tells me that I look really beautiful. And I lost my shit. I was like, are you taking the piss? I know what I look like right now. Who are you trying to kid? Not only that, you've told me that you're the same age as me. You're clearly in your 30s, mate. So I kicked off. They had locked us in a room together and hoped that we'd have some kind of interaction. Well, he was dying to leave after that. So that happened. And whilst we were there, we were staying with, so the family that we were staying with was my granddad's brother. And I ended up coming back from Pakistan, engaged to my granddad's brother's son.
Sorry, just working that through my head.
Yeah, so I need a minute to ingest that.
Yeah.
Basically, I used to call him uncle because he was my dad's cousin. The way our relationships work, I was calling him uncle. So I ended up coming back, engaged to my uncle. Islamically, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, incest is completely good and dandy in Islam. But also, because of the kinds of households we live in, I didn't realise how screwed up that was until I told my friends. So came back very quickly, isolated myself because I realised I was a freak, but also because I couldn't live the life that I had been living for the last 4 years, whilst, so did that. And whilst I was isolated, I delved really deep into Islam. I had to be a good Muslim girl in order for this marriage to work. So I did that. I researched and I left Islam for the second time after having delved really deep into it. And like Slavoj Žižek says a fantastic quote that he says that only a true believer can be an atheist. So when I first became an atheist, it was childish, it was unthinking, and it was just, there was nothing to it. The second time I became an atheist, there was no way I was going back to it because I was so well informed about what I left, and the horrors of what I found. And it was hard because on the one hand, what I was practicing and what I was seeing and what I was reading were just all three very different things. So I left Islam for the second time because my husband could beat me. And when I read that as a 19-year-old, I thought, well, why can't I beat my husband? I didn't think, why can he beat me? I thought, well, why can't I beat him if he's being... Because I was still a kid, really. Then the fact that he could rape me, it's framed in a way that if your husband invites you to bed and you say no to him, the angels will curse you all night. Now, as a Muslim, as a practicing Muslim at that time, that is a really scary idea for you.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Obviously, it's very suspicious, the fact that the text is completely skewed to the convenience of the male throughout all aspects of the religion. I think it's true of monotheism in general, really, isn't it? And it doesn't take much to figure out that it was actually written by a kind of, men who just wanted to control women at some point.
Yeah, exactly. So from 17 till 21, all of this was happening. So I actually broke the engagement off after 6 months because this guy became more and more extreme during our engagement, during the 6-month period. My dad went to Pakistan for a wedding and he went and stayed with them. And he walked in the house, clicked his fingers, expected his sisters to come and bring a bowl of water and wash his feet because he had been out. Now, me and my dad have had a really shaky relationship since, I was 15. But he also knew that there was no way that I was going to do that. There was certain things that he could make me do. He could make me cook, clean, and be like an obedient wife. There was no way I was going to wash his feet. That's just not something that we do. So he actually helped me break off the engagement. The other party, they refused to let us break the engagement off, and that went on for another 1.5 years. So it took a few years for me to escape that engagement. Thankfully, it didn't go any further. And actually, there was a point, I had a friend who said to me, Sadia, you're going to have sex with this guy. And I remembered throwing up in my mouth.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so where I'd agreed to it because I thought I had to help make things better for my family. I couldn't go through with it.
So it can hardly be said to be consensual as well.
Exactly. But no forced marriage or arranged marriage, even for that matter, is entirely consensual unless you're willingly getting into it. Because legally, the way that setup worked, I had consented to get into that arrangement. My grandparents had called me and said, it will make things better for the family or sort out all the family feuds. And I was stuck out there as well. They could so easily have left me out there again. So all of these things I was thinking. So I was like, yeah, fine, I'll do it. What shitty life anyway. Like my mum and dad hate me. My grandparents hate me. Maybe they'll love me again.
I always wonder as well. I mean, you've had all these experiences, and now you spend most of your time campaigning for women who might need the help that you didn't get and things like that. And I always wonder when I'm speaking to an activist, what's the mindset? Because you could completely understand somebody who's had your experience, who's kind of emancipated themselves from that, would just want to draw a line under it. You couldn't blame someone for not being an activist after that. And I was just wondering what's the difference in mindset where you think, actually, I want to get involved and help other people and kind of keep one foot in this world in a sense.
I guess when I'm working with other people, I don't think about myself. I do draw on my experiences to inform my practice because there's certain things that I know now that should have happened, that didn't happen, that I can utilize to support future clients, because then I can ensure the things that didn't happen with me do happen with other people. I don't generally sit and kind of wallow in self-pity about the things that happened to me, because they're just, to me now, I've got to the point, it's 18 years ago. I just think of it as a story now, because if I keep allowing myself to go back there emotionally, like I just wouldn't be able to live my life. But going back to something that you said about feminism, so I found feminism and socialism together at uni. They were like my first loves, really. I feel so hugely betrayed by both movements. The liberal movement that bends the rules for my oppressors. I have no time for them. And I think, well, how dare you? If we were talking about your daughter being forced into marriage, never ever ask them about themselves. People have a different standard for themselves. Ask them about their kids. And I do get really confrontational with people now because, like I said, I'm fed up with waiting for change. I expected things to have got better now. I expected for my life and for me to be able to live my life in the same way as my non-Muslim counterparts do in Britain. Having been born and raised here, spent 33 years of my life in this country, I expect for me to be able to pick and choose what parts of my culture and what parts of the indigenous culture I want to have in my life, and what parts I be entitled to discard of the parts of both that I don't like. And I've discarded primarily of all of the Islamic parts of my culture. Pakistani culture is slightly different. Punjabi culture is slightly different. And I've taken the bits that I like and discarded of the rest. I think it's so offensive for feminists to be telling me what my culture is and what I should and shouldn't be doing. There's this new expression, I don't know if you heard it or not, of stay in your lane.
Yeah, of course.
Well, eventually where that leads. So this was a kind of disgusting phrase that was born out of the whole cultural appropriation discussion. Now, initially, where that started was, eat your own food, wear your own clothes, listen to your own music, don't appropriate the traditions and practices of other cultures. Where that it ultimately leads to is stick to your own kind. don't you be marrying people from different racial groups, right? And there are the interesting thing, I spoke to somebody recently about this. I can't remember who I spoke to actually. Black Lives Matter in the US had spoken to people who were in mixed marriages. Those mixed marriages broke down, and they claimed they were so traumatized by them. And the Black Lives Matter movement said that it was because there was a lack of cultural understanding between the two. Now, whenever there's a breakup of any kind, it's like a bereavement. So it is going to be traumatizing. The racial backgrounds of both partners doesn't really make much of a difference. Some breakups are more traumatic than others. Some are amicable, some aren't. It's just a fact of life. To manipulate that into saying, well, it was because of the different racial backgrounds of the two communities is really, really, it's really troubling. But worse still, the Ku Klux Klan got behind this and said, yes, we're completely behind this.
Oh, wow. Imagine that. You're a black advocacy group and the KKK agrees with you.
Exactly, because this is it, right? So what the modern left and the far right are doing are feeding each other. They're giving each other little golden nuggets all the time. They say it's because they're left wing. They say it's because, of their like the far right ideologies, and they just feed off each other. So today, what that's left us, it's left us all feeling homeless, because I do not identify with any of the left. I don't identify with many feminists, including some of the radical feminists, actually, because some radical feminists have started adopting some archaic practices and some outdated ideas as well of division and kind of segregation and stuff like that. So this rot has set into society, and people aren't willing to challenge it, and now they're just feeding each other.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you say about being kind of politically homeless, because I'll still identify as centre left, but a part of me thinks maybe I've got some nostalgia for the old left, or another part of me's got some naive notion that maybe if I stick around and keep vocally championing my kind of old school leftist principles, maybe there'll be a change.
Yeah, I mean, I have been feeling like that too, until very recently when the Liberal Democrats adopted the Islamophobia definition without consultation, and then I was like, right, brilliant. So you've kicked me out as well. Obviously not, literally, like kind of literally, but like.
Yeah, you can't hang your hat on those guys anymore, can you? I mean, it's really strange what we're seeing here, especially with something like cultural appropriation, because for me growing up, the kind of liberal leftist attitude was you should embrace and experience other cultures. This is an enriching experience, and doing so will help create bonds with other ethnicities, other races, other countries, things like that. And now we're told, you don't wear a sombrero anywhere, you don't make sort of ethnic cuisine in ways that aren't authentic and things like that, because you can find yourself in some serious trouble with certain circles of the left. So it like, stay in your own lane. I think that's pretty perfect in expressing it. I did want to just move on as well to something more cheerful, the LGBT awareness campaign that's currently being pushed at the moment by ex-Muslims of Britain. Now, I mean, I don't suppose we can talk about this without really talking about CMB's involvement with Pride a couple of years ago, and that went swimmingly, didn't it?
So actually what we did for Pride was we replicated some of the old Christian slogans of God is gay, or Jesus has two dads, and Jesus is gay. So we just replicated that, and it created a shitstorm.
Yeah, I believe Central London Mosque got involved, didn't they?
So actually, East London Mosque is a very dangerous mosque. So we were thinking of organising a protest for fastifying this year. And when we were having the initial discussion, one of the volunteers said, we can't do it outside East London Mosque. And I said to him, why? And he said, well, East London Mosque have thugs inside the mosque that they will tell people aren't part of their mosque, that will come out and beat people up if they protest outside the mosque, if there's any actions outside the mosque. So they're actually a really, really dodgy place in themselves, but they have had some seriously homophobic speakers there. So I did the research after the 2017 Pride march, and at that point we'd found that in 10 years they'd had 10 homophobic speakers. Some of them were returnees that had made openly homophobic comments in the mosque that were asked to return, and then they said that, you know, we can't be held accountable for those people that are using our venue that we know nothing about.
You've got these signs, and obviously you were kind of homaging the signs that Christians had used to say that, you know, we're here, we're queer, and try and make Christianity more LGBT friendly. We don't seem to be making the same kind of progress within Islam. So they really took, I mean, and this isn't, you're not doing this in sort of Kabul, you're kind of on the streets of London, and with signs that Allah is gay, and that straight, and then I'm still scratching my head about this one, that was characterised as Islamophobic. So the idea that God might be gay is somehow bigotry towards Muslims, which is just an open admission of the homophobia within the faith then, really, isn't it?
Well, homophobia has been lying dormant in the UK for a very long time. So I don't know if you've been following the Parkfield School.
Yeah.
So there's a primary school in Birmingham that has this No Outsiders program that a gay teacher, Andrew Moffat, created. And he initially created it because he wanted to talk about homosexuality in school and just say, you know, gay people exist, no big problem. Then he expanded it to base it on the Equalities Act. So every part of the Equalities Act was in this No Outsiders program, the idea being that nobody is left outside and nobody is left behind. Fantastic. So initially it started in a different school, actually, and some Christian fundamentalists, a much, much smaller number of Christian fundamentalists, kicked back, had him pushed out of the school. So then he comes to this school, and then the Muslim fundamentalist parents kick off, and then joint onto that were general Muslim fundamentalists that weren't parents of children attending that school. So this blows out of proportion. Then off the back of that, the Christian fundamentalists thought, oh, thank fuck, we can now join this movement, you know, and like share our homophobia with these people that generally we would hate. And we saw this on our social media pages. So the Muslim fundamentalists were joined by the Christian fundamentalists, then the Jewish fundamentalists joined in, then the Hindu fundamentalists joined in, then the right fundamentalists joined in.
Nothing
so
like a bit of gay bashing to bring together an interfaith meeting, I suppose.
Exactly. Now, what we have in Britain is a fundamentalist uprising through the medium of homophobia. And actually, I think it was last month now, I was on The Big Questions. Now, had I openly on The Big Questions said that Muslims are abhorrent and they are sinners and they should be executed, you know, or that liken them to cannibals, liken them to, you know, pedophiles, incestuous pedophiles, I would have been prosecuted.
Yeah.
There were people on that show that likened homosexuals to cannibals, said that they were abhorrent people, that they were making a choice, making some really outdated, archaic statements. I'm still waiting for a prosecution. I'm still waiting for an official complaint. I'm still waiting for some kind of accountability for that disgusting behavior. And that was live on national television. So homophobia is still very present and prevalent within Britain. Through these fundamentalist movements is becoming more and more mainstream. And we're seeing more and more things being rolled back. Like I said, women's rights in terms of BME women's rights, the work that I was doing in terms of harmful traditional practices. Then we're looking at LGBT rights, where we made huge strides, that being reversed. So when you give rise to fundamentalism, that's exactly what we've done, then you allow all the hard work that was done in gaining those rights to be undone. And the thing is, the young people of today that are championing this kind of intolerance in the name of being tolerant, have never had to fight for anything.
Yeah.
They've had it say to them.
This is true, and I think this is one of the reasons there's a certain, contingent within a generation that are quite willing to dispense with freedom of expression. They kind of feel, they don't kind of understand that that's kind of the bedrock of all the rights that they're privileged to have, and we see this on campuses. I mean, I'm guessing you've had this experience where you've had to probably, or you at least an ex-Muslim, or you may this might apply to yourself, but you've been given an opportunity to speak within an academic space or at a venue, and people have complained that it's somehow bigotry or Islamophobic for you to do so?
Absolutely. But also what started happening now, something different started happening. A couple of years ago, when we used to get invited to universities, we used to get no platformed. The modern kind of no platforming is not even allowing us to come. So actually there's a university like around your area, I won't say which one, where somebody was trying to invite me to speak. He can't even get the permission of the student union for me to be able to go and speak. And he's been speaking to me for over a year. That poor guy, he's a kid essentially. He's doing sociology, and there's such a rot in the humanities at the moment.
Yeah.
It's really
Some bizarre far left intersectional gender critical theory seems to be infecting all facets of the conversation at the moment.
Absolutely. But he was in a sociology lesson, and one of his lecturers started saying, started conflating Islamophobia and racism. And all he said, he made one small statement, well, Islamophobia, like Muslims aren't a race. And it launched into this, like he was full on attacked. He's shown me some of the screenshots of the aftermath as well, where those like hysterical infants were like launching like hysterical debates online, saying that this guy was being openly racist to a Muslim lecturer. I mean, the lecturer is in a position of power, and he was behaving like a pathetic victim in that situation. This poor guy, the students called him a cunt. They said to him, come outside so we can kick the shit out of you. And the lecturer stood there playing victim, pretending he was scared. And I thought, what is this that's going on right now? How pathetic is this? But also universities have now become creche-like spaces for post-18-year-olds. They're no longer critical thinking establishments. They're no longer proper institutes for learning. They're just places that parents send their post-18-year-olds to be babysat because they can't look after themselves.
That's true. I mean, we saw this, with Mariana Massey as well when she spoke at Goldsmiths, didn't we? The harassment and hectoring she got from some I'll say, quote-unquote gentlemen from the Islamic Society. But what was really fascinating to me about that whole episode, for my listeners who don't know, Mariana Massey was trying to give a talk at Goldsmiths University. It wasn't mandatory, the event. You could come on your own accord, and some lads from the Islamic Society turned up on the front row, started hectoring, causing disturbances, even turned her projector off at one point when she was trying to show some Mohammed cartoons and things like that. It got quite heated. And what was fascinating to me about that whole episode was the LGBT society at the university came out in support of the Muslim students who, kind of shouted down this woman who's a staunch advocate of gay rights, and also the Feminist Society did the same thing. So we have an instance here where there's a woman, a minority, you could say, Iranian background, ex-Muslim. She's trying to give a talk, and the two groups you think might have her back, the LGBT Society and the Feminist Society, both see that behaviour and side with the Islamic Society. Well, Islamist Society is fair, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what's going on there then, when these groups can witness the sort of the harassment of a minority female who's also an advocate of gay rights and minority rights, and choose the side of her oppressor in a way?
But worse still, something that you didn't see in that video was those bastards were gesturing that they were going to cut her head off.
Wow.
To her crowd, right? Not only that, we went back the following year. The student union showed a video about safe spaces. They messed about the students so they couldn't open the event up to a bigger audience. They at one point the site went down. They said that the site went down so people couldn't buy tickets or book tickets. There was all kinds of stuff that the university did to prevent us from being there. But this is why I can no longer support anybody that doesn't support us. Like, I think I don't wish them harm, but I can't support them. And this is something else, Stephen, that I wanted to talk to you about. There's this, we were talking about how there's this constant pandering to my perpetrators or potential perpetrators. There's something else. I am expected to like those that want me dead, even though they don't like me. I can have a disagreement with somebody, dislike them, and I can say, hand on heart, I dislike a lot of people. I'm honest about that. I'm not going to pretend I'm some kind of hippie, because I'm not. That loves the world and loves everybody, and that I'm human too. If somebody doesn't like me, I'm not going to like them back. I'm not going to spend my time, because that's almost like somebody. Like in an abusive relationship, beating the crap out of me still going, I love you, I know you beat the crap out.
I mean, it's necessary to draw lines sometimes, isn't it?
Exactly. But it's okay to dislike people. But the difference is, I've never said I want those people dead. I've never said I want those people harmed. Those people that dislike me, and that's fair enough, they're perfectly within their rights to dislike me, also want me dead, also call for my death and the death of people like me. So why is it that these communities, the feminists, even the LGBT rights communities, like we saw at Pride, like we've seen with various Muslim LGBT groups, they side with those that want us dead, but also don't like them as well. They think that if they side with the oppressors are going to go, oh, okay, we like you now. That ain't going to happen, love. It's not going to happen.
No, it will not. It will not save you. That's when I see these groups like Gays Against Islamophobia and things like that. It really does send the noggin for a jogging, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, tell me a little bit more about the campaign that you're running at the moment. I mean, what's the goal there to raise funds for? What is it you're trying to achieve with the LGBT awareness campaign?
So there's two things that we're raising funds for. One is, for the first time ever, we finally managed to secure LGBT Muslims that are willing to sit down and have a conversation with LGBT ex-Muslims. That's never ever happened before. Last year, one group said that they were going to come and then pulled out at the last minute after having watched Islam's Non-Believers, the film that Dia Khan made.
Yeah.
He watched that and said, he sent this, long convoluted message as to why he couldn't come. Essentially, he said that he felt sorry for us and wanted to, because it was Ramadan at the time, and he said he wanted to have iftar with us, which completely missed the point of who we are. And this is the other thing, Stephen, that you'll find. There's this constant imposition of their beliefs, their religion, their ideas on us as non-believers. Look, I hate proselytizing in all shapes and forms, right? So I hate when religious people proselytize to me, but I also don't like proselytizing to others. I have seen atheists that say that they want to turn everybody atheist. Not my business. I don't care whatever anybody else believes. Just keep it out of my face. Don't abuse kids. Don't ask for tax exemptions or public money. That's when I have a problem, and that's when I'm going to go full force at them. But other than that, if it was just something that was a private affair, I couldn't give a shit what people believe. They can believe in flying fucking monkeys. It doesn't make a difference to me. So this event, there's going to be two things that we're going to be fundraising for. One is to take part in Pride in itself. To get all of the props and costumes, and we're hoping to go big this year, really. So for all the preparations for Pride itself. But the other thing is, so we have to pay the fee for Pride. We have to pay for a truck hire and stuff like that. And we're paying, if anybody needs travel or they need free admission or stuff like that, we will cover all of that, because we have a lot of asylum seekers that are LGBT as well, and apostates. And then we're holding this panel discussion, so we're hoping to fundraise for that. We're also thinking of doing a protest outside the Brunei University, because it's timely and needed.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So we're doing all of that in part as part of LGBT Awareness Month, to kind of raise the profile of but what it is to be LGBT and Muslim, what it is to be ex-Muslim, and what it is to be LGBT and ex-Muslim, because it doubles the trouble that those individuals have. Sometimes parents might say, and it's quite rare really. I mean, I do know a couple of LGBT Muslims that have been accepted by family. I know a lot of LGBT Muslims that have been completely shunned by family and never ever going to see them again.
Yeah, this kind of this weird archaic thought process that being gay is kind of like a non-Muslim Western phenomenon, or worse than that, it's learned behaviour, which we've seen a lot of that in this discussion around Parkfield and their curriculum. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, I could just pick your brain on the scriptural input or inspiration behind some of the homophobia. A lot of people will say, well, there isn't an awful lot in the Quran about condemning homosexuals.
What the Quran says is that you can't lie with, like, a man can't lie with a man, a woman can't lie with a woman, in terms of the punishments and the additional information around it. That comes from the hadith. Now, if anybody says that some hadiths are contested or whatever, the problem is that they still believe them. It's like when we have a discussion about FGM. So now I've managed to tease out all of the hadiths that say that FGM is required or mandatory or obligatory in Islam. The reason we're not being able to eradicate such practice is because people are denying the religious links. Think about male circumcision. That has been even harder. So because the hadiths were not concrete in terms of FGM, they still exist. They absolutely still exist. But because they weren't concrete in terms of FGM, there was a little bit of uncertainty around that. It's been just a tiny bit easier to raise the profile of FGM. In terms of male circumcision, impossible. You can't touch it, even though at the beginning of the year, we had one twin toddler in Italy that was seriously injured and another one that died because of circumcision gone wrong. So young boys are dying as well because of the practice. But no, we can't talk about it because it's religiously mandated. So, you can't touch it. So there's some honesty is required around this, and the hadiths are used by every Sunni Muslim, and the majority of the Muslims in the world are Sunni Muslims. So you can't just say, well, it's not in the Quran, so it doesn't matter, because it does. Yeah. Because the hadith is used by a large majority of Muslims, and even countries that are Shia still, publicly hang and throw homosexuals off buildings. So it means nothing.
Yeah, I mean, what I find it really difficult to get my head around as well is that when we're talking about FGM, people will often say, well, no, it's an African problem or a mainly African issue. And they'll say that in a response to somebody saying it's an Islamic issue, because their point is, well, to say it's an Islamic issue is bigotry. However, we can say it's an African issue and it's somehow not bigotry. And I've never managed to get my head around the distinction between pointing the finger at a religion and blaming a sort of an entire continent.
Now we come to Islamic racism, which obviously doesn't exist if you ask any liberal postmodernist fuckwit. But it's very much there. It is very much there, Think about the slavery that's happening post-Gaddafi in Libya. Like, the slave trade just went completely mental out there. Think about the slavery that still exists in Saudi, because it's religiously mandated. Not only do they have slaves, but the Saudi men will sexually abuse their female slaves because they think that they have the right to do that. You are able to rape what your right hand possesses. So that's very much there. And there's this double standards, by the way. So we talk about Western imperialism, Western colonialism. This is Arab imperialism and colonialism. Now, when we talk about Western foreign policy, what we're talking about is the powers that be in Western countries. We're not talking about white working class people or poor working class people or, powerless Western people. Like you and I have nothing to do with Western foreign policy. This is really important because when we're talking about Arab imperialism, what we're actually talking about is the powerful elite in Saudi Arabia. There's always somebody, because I intentionally call it Arabization of the whole world, because Saudi money and Saudi influence it has changed the shape and face of every Islamic country in the world. At one point, they were pumping so much. I think one year Saudi spent $70 billion, not reals, dollars, sending that money into every Islamic institution, school, mosque around the world, to like make it quite extreme, make it the Saudi version of Islam.
It's kind of a really hardcore Salafi interpretation, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So this is Saudi imperialism. This is Arab imperialism. And actually, their worst victims, those that were worst affected, were the Arabs. So, and the same with us, Western foreign policy, it did have a huge impact on the West. The poor people in the West, the working class people in the West, and just normal people in the West were kicked in the backside by austerity because of what they wanted to do abroad. So I think people become really, really defensive when we start having this conversation, but it's an important conversation to have, and it's a desperately needed conversation to have, because unless you kind of talk about the elephant in the room, you can't deal with the elephant in the room, right? This is our big elephant in the room at the moment. This Arab imperialism is sweeping across the world and it's consuming everything it touches, but because Western liberals are unwilling to call it what it is, because obviously brown people can't be imperialists, right? That we're not gonna be able to deal with it, and that's something that I'm trying to do. And it's still considered quite controversial. Not everybody likes the way I frame it, but I'm saying it as I see it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, and you kind of mirror in the language that's used against sort of what's thought of to be as like Western imperialism, I suppose, as well. I mean, it might be worth talking about an issue we have in the UK, a fairly new issue, but a serious one nonetheless, and that's of jihadis and British-born Muslims, travelling abroad to fight for terrorist organisations like Islamic State. And it's been all over the news recently because we have a similar issue with young girls going out there under the pretense of being some Jihadi bride, as if they're going to some sort of, Islamic Disneyland. I think a lot of them tend to think, or maybe they don't. But I mean, the high profile case surrounding that was one of the young girls from Bethnal Green, Shamina Begum, been doing the rounds in the news. Now, the situation as it stands is she's been located in a camp in Syria by a Times journalist, and she wants to come home. She's very unsympathetic. She doesn't renounce any of her beliefs. She was 15 when she went out there, and our Home Secretary has stripped her of her citizenship now, and I believe there's going to be an appeal. And I was wondering where you fall on this issue, because I'm really struggling with this one, I'll be honest with you, because on principle I feel she's a British citizen, she was born and raised in this country, she's a product of this country, she's our problem to deal with, we should bring her back and try her. And there's another part of me that just thinks, well, fuck her.
Yeah.
I don't know what the right decision is here.
That's completely natural. My first gut instinct, the first time I was exposed to the story, my instant gut reaction was, no, I don't want to hear.
Yeah.
Right? But when you think about the argument about free speech, when you start stripping the right of one person to be able to say what they want, gradually they come after everybody. So this is the same thing with Shamima Begum. And I know instinctively, we as humans want to keep ourselves safe. Right?
Yeah,
That's
but I mean, she's not kind of in trouble for speaking her mind, is she? It's not to be contrasted with joining a terrorist organisation. I think at first it was, she kind of made out that she was sort of innocent and quite passive in this organisation. There's been fairly credible claims recently to say that she's helped stitch people into suicide vests and things like that.
Yeah, but the thing is, right, so if we allow the law to be broken, and we are breaking a law by stripping of her of her citizenship, then eventually laws could be broken for us as well. So if we were being tried by a court, they can break the law for us as well. They can say, well, the law doesn't apply here because we don't fancy it, right? So that's one thing. So immigration
is it definitely? I mean, this is a genuine question because I'm not obviously versed in sort of the legal A's of this. Is it actually breaking the law? Is it a loophole? I mean, I'm guessing all this will get sorted out in the appeal process.
So in terms of immigration law, if somebody is coming to the country and it does not serve the purpose of this country, like if it's detrimental for this country for that person to be here, the Home Secretary is able to use his discretion to refuse them entry into the country. However, in this case, she is a British citizen. She has never been to Bangladesh, so stripping her of British citizenship, particularly when she's never lived in Bangladesh, she's not, she has nothing to do with that, and she was radicalized here. Yes, I would say that is breaking the law. Now, the problem with immigration law is it can be bent and abused how the Home Secretary wishes, and that's a problem with the legislation in itself. Because I'm doing something around immigration law at the moment for our clients. So yes, that's a problem for me. So the whole British jihadi movement started during Bosnia in this country. Now, the reason it was so easy for people to be pulled into that, I remember being told all my life that Muslims are victims. That narrative was given to me my whole life by my family. We're always going to be persecuted. We're always, they've got a bit of a persecution complex in some ways. So even when it was racism, they painted it as like attacks against Muslims, which racism is abhorrent, of course. No one's saying that should happen. But what I'm saying is that it was manipulated to be, this is something that's happening to Muslims, so that they could create that division. So it's really easy to then radicalize somebody who thinks that they're being persecuted by just kind of poking that feeling inside them that, yes, I am constantly being persecuted. So that there's that one thing. But I do think what we need, and I genuinely believe this, we had the Nuremberg trials and the Nuremberg court for those war criminals. Actually, I think that's what we need for the radicals that we have created in our country. I think we need specific court, specific legislation, specific experts to be able to deal with the mess that we've created. We can't just dump them elsewhere. That's not fair. And some countries are not going to have the framework ready to deal with this kind of criminal.
I tend to agree with that. That would be my position on principle. The issue I have really, I suppose, is that convicting them in a court or for their crimes can be very difficult, given a lot of the evidence has been dissipated or is strewn across sort of Syrian battlefields and things like that, and they might not get the full force of the justice they deserve because it's a very difficult case to prove. So I mean, would it be worth just making the crime of travelling abroad to join a terrorist organisation a crime that carries a really heavy sentence behind bars?
Yeah, why not? Why not? If you can prove that, and that's exactly what we know now of her, then actually yes you can. Because I mean, as a 15-year-old, I think there's this difficult area, right? Lots of people have said she was a minor, she was groomed, etc., etc., etc. But as a 15-year-old, there's a big difference between going down your local park, having a can of cider and smoking a joint, and going and watching someone's head being chopped off and think, that's all good and done.
We've all been there, haven't we? Saturday night, you need to kill some cafe.
Exactly. So I think the response has to be kind of proportionate as well. Yes, I understand she was a minor, but the crime was so grave that we have to treat it with a bit more seriousness. And we have dealt with minors that have committed criminal offences before. Do you remember the Jamie Bolger case?
Yes, I was just going to bring that up. Yeah.
Yes. So we've treated those perpetrators with absolute seriousness. So I'm not sure why we're kind of like being flexible with somebody who's potentially sat back and colluded in the killings of hundreds of thousands of people. So I think sometimes people become hysterical and people become a bit nervous, like simultaneously alongside each other. There's some people that are going to be nervous of creating more radicals by having any conversation with that, which I don't actually have any sympathy with that viewpoint. And And then there's going to be some people who infantilize her, which I'm not willing to do, because as a 15-year-old, yes, although you're a kid in some ways, I mean, I was a kid I still felt like a child when I was in my 20s, but also as a 15-year-old, I did feel grown up enough to do certain things and think through certain things. Like I would have bunked off school and not thought that was a problem. I would have, I don't know, nicked some mascara and not thought that was a problem. But then I wouldn't have killed somebody. I wouldn't have advocated somebody being killed.
Yeah.
You know, when we would have had those conversations, I would have thought, hang on a minute, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you've got to look at it in the sense that if there was somebody who was in the UK illegally and they'd committed some heinous crimes, we quite rightly want them deported. So from the perspective of the Syrian people who have suffered under her, you know, we shouldn't believe it to be their problem. We should take responsibility. That's how I feel today on a Wednesday evening, but it is subject to change, unfortunately.
And that's fair, actually. It's a more honest position to have, because I think some people are not being able to honestly and openly talk about how they're feeling about this. And it's a perfectly legitimate thing to say. But I heard this and thought, no, I don't want her near my family. Like, people are scared. And that's okay to say. Just because somebody's saying, no, I don't want her here, doesn't instantly make them a far-right bigot. It just means that they're scared. And I got that reaction. I understood that feeling. But also logically, I also know we have a responsibility to take care of our own mess. If somebody went on a murdering spree here, we wouldn't expect Spain or Bangladesh or Syria to deal with them. We would deal with them here because they're born here, they commit the crime here, etc., etc. And she was radicalized here. And because we weren't able to prevent that here, we need to be a bit more responsible, really, in our response.
Yeah, that sounds sensible to me. Okay, Sadia, well, I've pretty much ticked off the majority of the things I wanted to get through with you. So I suppose, is there anything else you wanted to get across to my listeners before I let you get back to your evening?
No, just if you could support our fundraiser, that would be amazing. And if you want to come to our events, please do get in touch. If you're in need of any support, please email me. My email address is usually on the website. That's everything, I think.
Where can people find you to send lovely, non-trollish comments on that wonderful platform that is Twitter?
It's CEMB Forum.
Excellent. Sadia, thank you very much for giving up some of your evening to speak to me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Stephen. You take care.
You too. Thank you for listening to the Godless Spellchecker podcast. The podcast is a one-man operation, produced in my spare time away from my day job, and I love making it for you. If you enjoy what you hear, please consider lending some support. The show is entirely listener supported. I don't sell anything, I don't run ads, and given the alternative and unpopular focus of my content, it's very unlikely to find a sponsor. So there are a number of ways you can support and chip in and help improve the show and give me more time to produce more content. You can become a patron supporter and pledge a monetary amount per month or per episode by visiting patreon.com/gspellchecker. If you can't lend monetary support right now, don't worry, there's other ways you can help the podcast too. You can share it on your various social media networks, or take a moment to leave a review wherever you listen to it. Your support is massively appreciated. Thank you. Think we've all learned something here today?